Tutankhamun. Among the hundreds of rulers of the 32 dynasties that have ruled Egypt, he is probably the most famous of all the pharaohs. Yet his reign, lasting barely 9 years, was one of the shortest in the history of any dynasty. Tutankhamun owes his fame to a high-profile expedition led by Egyptologist Howard Carter and his wealthy patron Lord Carnarvon in the 1920s. For years, they searched for the tomb, spending large parts of Lord Carnarvon's fortune. Just as they were about to give up, the unearthing of a nondescript stone step led Carter to his unprecedented discovery.
The wealth of finery, the sumptuous death mask, the finely worked sarcophagus, and over 5,000 objects in the tomb.
Remarkably, this tomb of extraordinary archaeological richness, devoted to a minor pharaoh, was left untouched by tomb robbers. More than 3,000 years after the ruler's death, the world would learn the name Tutankhamun, adding to the pharaoh's sudden fame a legendary curse. Death would come to anyone who dared disturb the resting place of the deceased sovereign. And for Howard Carter's team, who opened the tomb in 1923, there might have been something to it.
Journalists would claim that archaeologists failed to heed a warning engraved at the tomb's entrance. Death shall come on swift wings to he who disturbs the peace of a king.
From the long-awaited discovery of his tomb to the curse that propelled this unknown pharaoh to superstardom. This is the story of Tutankhamun. Egypt, land of the pharaohs. The cradle of one of the greatest and most renowned civilizations in the history of mankind. It is home to some of the world's most incredible archaeological remains. The Sphinx of Giza, the Pyramid of Cheops, and of course, the famous Valley of the Kings, home to the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered in 1922 by Egyptologist Howard Carter.
Today, when we talk about rulers of ancient Egypt, people immediately think of Cleopatra, Ramses II, and of course, Tutankhamun. Yet, before Howard Carter's expedition, nobody knew who he was. From a strictly historical and political point of view, Tutankhamun is considered by Egyptologists to be a very minor pharaoh. Once his tomb was discovered, he became the world's most famous pharaoh, an international celebrity.
Until 1922, this pharaoh was only known to a handful of Egyptologists. The public at large had little sense of his time on the throne.
He was born around 1345 BCE and died before his 20th birthday. His unremarkable reign lasted barely 9 years. He ruled over Upper and Lower Egypt 34 centuries ago, when the kingdom was at its height, though threatened by invaders from neighboring countries.
Despite his obscurity, Tutankhamun belongs to a prestigious line of 18th dynasty pharaohs, which began in 1570 BCE. Egyptologists consider that period to be the height of ancient Egyptian civilization.
Based on stele inscriptions, on tomb walls, and DNA samples, Egyptologists have established a detailed family tree for Tutankhamun. His maternal and paternal grandparents are Amenhotep III and Tai. His father is Akhenaten, but the identity of his mother is still a matter of debate. What we do know for certain is that Tutankhamun came from a long line of incestuous marriages. Some Egyptologists lean towards Nepta, one of the 4 daughters of Amenhotep and Tai, while others believe that it was in fact Nefertiti, Akhenaten's first cousin.
Egyptologists estimate that Tutankhamun came to power around 1336 BCE, about 2 years after the death of his father, Akhenaten. He then became the 11th pharaoh of Egypt's 18th dynasty.
Les égyptologues ne savent pas encore avec exactitude dans quelles circonstances Toutankhamon a pris la tête de l'Égypte.
3 years elapsed between Akhenaten's death and his young son's official succession as ruler of Egypt. During that interval, the seat may have been held by either his half-sister, Neferneferuaten, or his older sister, Merenptah.
By succeeding Akhenaten, the young and inexperienced pharaoh inherited the onerous task of ruling a kingdom weakened by his father's widely unpopular political and religious decisions.
His father, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten, ruled Egypt for almost 4 decades. Mostly, he's famous for religious reforms that his people considered heretical. Not only did he establish a monotheistic cult devoted to the deity Aten, the solar god he claimed to be the incarnation of, but he also moved Egypt's capital from Thebes to a city he created near the Nile at Tel El Amarna, which he named after himself, Akhetaten.
Akhenaten was considered an apostate, and when he died, his political opponents forced his heir, Tutankhamun, to put an end to what they claimed was his father's heresy. A red sandstone stele discovered at Karnak, in the heart of the Temple of Amun, bears witness to the efforts the young pharaoh made to re-establish, probably under pressure from his entourage, the ancestral traditions and religion discarded by his father.
2 years into his reign, Tutankhamun abandoned the cult of Aten and the capital built by his father. He and his court returned to Thebes, where he reinstated polytheism. Under his influence, the gods and goddesses of the Egyptian pantheon, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Anubis, and others, regained their temples and prestige. Egyptologists consider this to be the most significant decision he made during his reign. Given his very young age and possibly weak constitution, he was certainly influenced by Ai, who was his father Akhenaten's royal scribe, and Horemheb, the general-in-chief of his armies.
Based on recent studies, some Egyptologists believe that besides Tutankhamun's youth and inexperience, he was of a fragile constitution and may have suffered from physical disabilities or diseases that would have made him even more vulnerable to the influence of others.
The fact that he was the fruit of an incestuous union must have contributed to his health problems. The exceptional preservation of Tutankhamun's mummy has enabled forensic medical tests which have revealed diseases linked to the environment, heredity, and accidents. One of his hereditary diseases was sickle cell anemia, which alters the hemoglobin that carries oxygen in the blood. That certainly contributed to Tutankhamun's weakening. He was also diagnosed with severe necrosis in 2 of his foot bones, which probably forced him to use walking sticks.
This theory is also supported by the discovery of 130 walking sticks inside the pharaoh's tomb. It would therefore seem that Tutankhamun's life was beset by illness, which caused his death at the age of 19 after ruling Egypt for almost half his life. The circumstances surrounding the death of this young sovereign of frail health has always been a cause for speculation. Science can provide researchers with some answers or more questions. It would seem that Tutankhamun's life was beset by illness, which caused his death at the age of 19 after ruling Egypt for almost half his life. Science can provide researchers with some answers or more questions.
An X-ray of Tutankhamun's skull in 1968 suggests assassination, as it looked like the young pharaoh's skull had been punctured by a blunt object. But a closer look determined that the damage had occurred after death, probably during embalming.
In 2005, for the first time ever, a team of Egyptologists working for the Cairo Museum obtained permission to extract the mummy from its tomb in the Valley of the Kings. This is an unprecedented event, thanks to the use of CT, computerized tomography, a scanning technique that will enable more precise and reliable explanations to be given. They will have a quarter of an hour to place the body inside a CT scanner installed in a specially equipped vehicle parked near the tomb. The computer-driven scanner produces images of cross-sectional slices of different parts of the body. It generated 1,700 images with remarkable precision.
His tissue contained a parasite that causes malaria. That, plus the other ailments, weakened Tutankhamun.
He also had a fracture on the lower part of his left femur, with the kneecap torn off. According to scientists, Tutankhamun, who died around 5 days after sustaining this fracture, probably got an infection. That was the final nail in his coffin.
Thanks to its excellent state of preservation, Tutankhamun's mummy would provide a goldmine of information. As analysis methods grew more sophisticated, archaeologists even succeeded in reconstructing his face.
Beneath Tutankhamun's mask, his face was mummified using techniques developed over millennia, preserving the structure for more than 3,300 years. The skin may have darkened, but didn't fully decompose. The same with his body.
Inspired by the legend of Osiris, the god of the dead, and designed to preserve the remains of pharaohs to ensure their souls' passage into the afterlife, the ritual of mummification is a highly important ceremony performed by royal embalmers. Benefiting from the dry, hot climate of the Egyptian desert, the embalming ritual, which lasts around 70 days, follows a specific procedure in which all organs, except for the heart, are removed from the royal remains before the body is dehydrated with sodium carbonate. Finally, oils and liquid resin are applied to the flesh to ensure its excellent state of preservation.
Scientists relied on the bone structure and tissues preserved during mummification to rebuild the pharaoh's face, starting with the position and the shape of the skull, the preserved skin, joints and ligaments. They obtained this synthetic image by adding muscles, fat, and skin from Tutankhamun's face. The reconstructed pharaoh had high cheekbones, a skull stretched backwards and flattened at the top, a slightly prominent upper lip, and a slightly flattened nose.
Even with this wealth of information about his appearance, health, life, and his reign, the circumstances of his death remain elusive. These crucial historical elements seem to have been deliberately erased by his successors, who were not his direct descendants, because the young pharaoh, gone too soon, left no heir.
Tutankhamun was succeeded by Ai, his advisor and his father's former royal scribe. He was not a descendant of Akhenaten, but legitimized his power the old-fashioned way by marrying Ankhenamun, Tutankhamun's widow and sister. Ai died just 4 years after taking the throne. After him came Horemheb, the young pharaoh's other advisor and Akhenaten's former general, who also had no family ties. His accession began the 19th dynasty of the pharaohs. We know so little about Tutankhamun because his successors did a great job erasing all traces of his reign.
Tutankhamun's father was the world's first monotheist, and the Egyptians didn't like it. When he died, they destroyed his tomb. Then they erased his name from the records and did the same thing to his son, which is probably why Tutankhamun's tomb was forgotten. Ironically, this actually preserved his legacy. Since the looters didn't know his name, they weren't looking for Tutankhamun's tomb.
But the little that we do know about Tutankhamun suggests that he wasn't just a figurehead.
It's believed that Tutankhamun tried to ease the political and military tensions with neighboring countries, which had grown during his father's reign. But we do know that during his reign, Egypt went to war against Nubia, its constant rival. Gifts found in his tomb suggest that he may have been somewhat successful, but historical knowledge of this period is still very fragmentary.
Even these small facts may never have come to light if it weren't for the dedication of one man, an English archaeologist, Howard Carter. The little that we do know about Tutankhamun may never have come to light if it weren't for the dedication of one man, Howard Carter.
Howard Carter est né en 1874 à Londres. Il vient d'un milieu modeste et il est le dernier d'une fratrie de 11 frères et sœurs. Carter n'est pas très éduqué au départ, il n'est pas allé à l'université. Il a été éduqué à la maison par ses parents qui étaient des artistes. Il va lui-même rapidement faire preuve d'un talent naturel pour le dessin et la peinture.
At the age of 17, through family connections, he was recommended to Percy Newberry, a renowned Egyptologist who was looking for an artist. After a 3-month apprenticeship at the British Museum, Howard Carter set off to Egypt to work on a major excavation at Amarna, an archaeological site linked to Akhenaten. His job was to reproduce the paintings and hieroglyphs of the temples.
For young Howard Carter, the sight of Egyptian monuments is a revelation that would change the course of his life. From then on, he has only one goal: to become an Egyptologist. In 1900, when Carter was 26, his work caught the attention of the eminent French archaeologist Gaston Maspero. Impressed by the quality of his reproductions of the bas-reliefs in the Temple of Amun, Maspero appointed Carter to the position of inspector at the Department of Egyptian Antiquities, where he was the director.
In the early 1900s, Howard Carter worked alongside Egyptologist Theodore M. Davis in the Valley of the Kings, referred to in Egyptian scriptures as the great and majestic necropolis of the million years of the Pharaoh, life, strength, health in the west of Thebes. It was considered the ideal place for the burial of Egyptian sovereigns, as it was deemed too remote in the desert to attract grave robbers.
Howard Carter quickly makes a name for himself. In 1906, Gaston Maspero recommends his young protege, Howard Carter, to Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy British patron.
They met at the Luxor Hotel in Cairo, where Howard Carter soon thrilled Lord Carnarvon with stories about Tutankhamun. They chose a site in the Valley of the Kings, in a spot controlled by Theodore Davis, an archaeologist Howard Carter had worked with a few years earlier. Theodore Davis's work led to the discovery of several objects, including embalming tools, linen, and other artifacts bearing Tutankhamun's seal. But this virtually unknown pharaoh was of little interest to him, and he doubted his tomb would be anything special, if it existed at all.
But Howard Carter believed that these artifacts, bearing Tutankhamun's name and appearing in almost no register, hinted that Tutankhamun's tomb did exist and could be nearby. Theodore Davis agrees to hand his concession to Carter.
Unfortunately, the excavation permit wasn't granted until 1914, and the outbreak of the First World War delayed the start of the dig. Nevertheless, in 1915, Howard Carter finally succeeded in exploring the tomb of Amenhotep III, father of Akhenaten and grandfather of Tutankhamun. But it wasn't until December 1917 that he began searching for the tomb of Tutankhamun, whom he nicknamed the Boy King.
The setting for Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon's adventure in the Valley of the Kings, or Biban al-Maluk as it's known locally, is almost 650 kilometers south of Cairo. Here on the west bank of the Nile lies the vast necropolis, housing the remains of the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, a period that stretched from 1550 to 1070 BCE. Tombs dug into the slopes of the high limestone cliffs were designed by the ancient Egyptians to remain hidden and avoid being looted.
Every year between 1917 and 1922, thanks to the financial support of his generous patron Lord Carnarvon, Howard Carter undertook a new excavation campaign, gradually exploring and eliminating each area. After keeping a logbook of all the sites discovered in the Valley of the Kings, Carter developed a meticulous mapping method, dividing the site into grids. With his painstaking search technique, the Egyptologist makes tireless progress from one sector of the Valley of the Kings to another, hoping to find the tomb of this elusive pharaoh.
Despite years of back-breaking toil in the dust and scorching heat of the Egyptian desert, Howard Carter went from one failure to the next. Lord Carnarvon's patience and finances were beginning to dry up. So in the spring of 1922, he told Howard Carter he'd have to stop subsidizing him. Howard Carter desperately managed to obtain a few months' reprieve to explore the last small triangle of ground that had not yet been turned over. It was on the side of the mountain where the foundations of stone huts, probably used by ancient workers, had been uncovered a few decades earlier.
Although it seems unlikely that a royal tomb would have been dug so close to these modest stone huts, Carter throws himself passionately into the dig. He has no other choice. This is his last chance. Howard Carter undertook a new excavation campaign. He has no other choice. This is his last chance.
The excavation began on November 1st. 3 days in, a child who was there to distribute water to the members of the expedition found an unusually shaped stone. He tells Howard Carter, who instructs his men to clear the ground, and realizes that the stone is in fact the rung of a staircase cut into the rock. This staircase, which had been buried by earth and sand over millennia, marks the entrance to a hypogeum, or an underground tomb. After clearing away the debris cluttering the stairway, Howard Carter's team discovers the top of a doorway, sealed with plaster. On it are the unbroken seals. Carter hurries to decipher the hieroglyphs and realizes they are Tutankhamun's royal cartouches.
After so much effort and skepticism, the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb is a lifelong dream come true.
Howard Carter rushes to send a telegram to Lord Carnarvon, who had returned to London on personal business. He writes, and I quote, "At last have made wonderful discovery in the valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered, same for your arrival."
Lord Carnarvon demands that Carter await his arrival on February 16, 1923, the day before the tomb's official opening. He begins preparing for his trip to Egypt, accompanied by his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, to whom he has passed along the Egyptology bug. Meanwhile, as Howard Carter's team clears the tomb, he notices that the door shows signs of repair. He now fears that the tomb may not be intact after all.
The next day, as the whole team gathered to open the tomb, Howard Carter was nervous. With Carnarvon and other observers watching, he drills a small hole in the top corner of the door and places a candle inside. The flame is eventually extinguished, but not before Howard Carter has a chance to peek into the tomb.
As his eyes adjust to the darkness, Lord Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Herbert, ask him, "Can you see anything?" Howard Carter says, "Yes, I see wonderful things. Objects are piled up by the hundreds in the room. At the far end, 2 statues of the Pharaoh standing sentinel to a sealed door catch the eye. The burial chamber is intact."
It is this door that will finally be opened on February 17, 1923. In the presence of the Queen of Belgium and her son Leopold. The happy few who witnessed this once-in-a-lifetime event discover 4 interconnected rooms: the antechamber, the annex, the treasure room, and in the center of the tomb, the burial chamber. In the center of this room, with its blue and gold tiled walls, are 3 gold sarcophagi. In the largest lies the mummy of Tutankhamun, intact and unseen for 3 millennia.
Inside the tomb, they found 3 sarcophagi, including one weighing over 110 kilograms, with winged goddesses carved into the corners, protecting Tutankhamun's mummy. The funerary mask consisted of 2 gold plates adorned with semi-precious stones. The headdress is topped by 2 symbolic animals, the vulture and the cobra.
This incredible sarcophagus is the most fabulous find in the history of archaeology.
The other 2 sarcophagi were smaller. CT scans revealed that they contained 2 female fetuses, one at 5 or 6 months, the other at 9 months, just before term. Scientists found no causes of death. The mummified children are a rare and puzzling discovery. The presence of these 2 fetuses in his burial chamber suggests that the loss of these children was traumatic for Tutankhamun.
Next to the burial chamber containing the sarcophagi, Carter and his team find another, smaller room, known today as the treasure room. When he writes his memoirs a few years later, Carter describes his first glimpse into this room filled with priceless treasures. The hot air escaping from the room caused the candle to flicker, but presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere the glint of gold. Instantly, I was struck dumb with amazement.
Inside the tomb chambers, there are more than 2,000 objects, including a splendid throne, several beds, one decorated with 2 long golden cows. There are also jewels, statuettes, heads, and masks, around 130 walking sticks, vases, and fans. Egyptologists believe that many of these objects were not created specifically for Tutankhamun, who died suddenly and prematurely. Funerary objects intended for others may have been repurposed in the rush to fill his tomb, but they were still spectacular.
The Pharaoh's tomb contains some of the finest solid gold artifacts ever recovered, miraculously escaping tomb robbers for over 3,000 years. The Pharaoh's tomb contains some of the finest solid gold artifacts ever recovered, miraculously escaping tomb robbers for over 3,000 years.
While exploring the tomb, Howard Carter and his team discovered a statue of the deity with the body of a jackal. It's carved from black painted wood, adorned with gold around the ears and silver claws. It stood on the roof of a shrine close to the burial chamber and not far from a chest containing Tutankhamun's canopic vases. Trapezoidal in shape, the space contained jewels, amulets, and other objects.
Among these objects are weapons, such as shields, bows, and swords, as well as a dagger with an iron blade and a gold sleeve adorned with precious stones. That dagger is especially remarkable.
For archaeologists, this dagger is a real puzzle. At the time of Tutankhamun's reign, during the 18th dynasty, ironworking hadn't yet been developed in Egypt. Some speculate the weapon could have been a gift to Amenhotep III, grandfather of Tutankhamun, by Tushratta, who ruled Mitanni, where Syria is today. What's even more astonishing about this dagger is that it's a metal not of terrestrial origin, but of meteoric origin, making it an especially rare and valuable object at the time.
By any measure, the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb and all its treasures is the greatest find in the history of pharaonic archaeology and makes international headlines. Overnight, Carter becomes the world's most famous Egyptologist.
After receiving Howard Carter's telegram, Lord Carnarvon sold the exclusive story to the London Times newspaper for £4,000, a colossal sum for the time, equivalent to over €2 million today. The money helped Lord Carnarvon replenish his coffers and finally break even. In 1922, when the tomb was discovered, newspapers were able to print photographs which fired up enthusiasm for Tutankhamun. The world had never seen anything like it.
Just a few days after opening the tomb, the euphoria begins to fade as the English adventurers see the politics of Egypt change overnight.
To the misfortune of Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon, Egypt had suffered a period of serious political upheaval, which had soured the Egyptian administration's attitude towards foreigners. Britain had occupied Egypt since the Anglo-Egyptian War in 1882, as they tried to establish a British protectorate and wrestle control of Egypt from the Ottoman Empire. A rebellion against British rule had swept across the country in 1918, forcing Britain to recognize Egypt's independence 4 years later, in 1922, the same year of the tomb's discovery. Obviously, this made things very difficult for Carter and Carnarvon.
The climate of hostility towards the English worked against Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon.
Between 1925 and 1930, 5 years of pro-English governments allowed Carter to complete his work. But when the Egyptian nationalists returned to power, they forbade any object found in Tutankhamun's tomb from being taken out of Egyptian territory. This law ended the claims of Lord Carnarvon's heirs, but empowered the Egyptian people to identify with their past and their cultural riches.
To make matters worse, by granting exclusive coverage of the event to the Times, a British newspaper, Lord Carnarvon alienated the entire Egyptian press. They refer to him and Carter as tomb robbers, a reputation which sticks to these two European adventurers for over a century.
Au début du 19e siècle, les campagnes de Napoléon en Égypte permettent l'essor de l'égyptologie parce qu'il a amené des scientifiques avec lui. Un peu plus tard, Jean-François Champollion commence à déchiffrer les hiéroglyphes et dans la foulée, de nombreux Occidentaux se sont découverts une passion pour l'égyptologie. Mais la plupart de ces passionnés se comportent plus comme des chercheurs de trésors que comme des chercheurs tout court. Pendant longtemps, ils se sont livrés à des pillages et à des trafics.
Despite having a valid excavation permit, Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon ran into trouble with the Antiquities Service just a few months after they discovered Tutankhamun's tomb. A new regulation required an inspector's constant presence at any excavation site and stipulated that the Egyptian state reserved the right to keep any objects discovered without the archaeologist having any say in the matter.
But Lord Carnarvon would never have time to say anything. He dies suddenly on April 5th, 1923. Just over 4 months after the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb. Officially, his cause of death is severe pneumonia associated with septicemia, caused by an infected mosquito bite. But the sudden death of the English lord stokes a viral rumor.
Cette mort soudaine est aussitôt interprétée par la presse comme le signe de la colère du pharaon qui se serait abattu sur l'un des profanateurs de sa tombe.
Everywhere around the world, the press is intrigued about this story of a curse. For the tabloid press, this story of a mummy's curse almost rivals the spectacular discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb itself. Hollywood sees a great opportunity to make money and attract moviegoers to the theaters. They will take advantage of the situation and produce the horror film The Mummy, which will be a huge success and spawns many remakes.
In the decade following the opening of the tomb, 27 people involved in either the discovery of the mummy or who handled objects in the crypt perished. These deaths fueled the belief in a curse.
And yet, while some newspapers were certainly guilty of fabricating rumors with no basis in fact, other fatal incidents, real ones, seem to lend disturbing credibility to this story of a curse, at least on the face of it.
The first objective fact to support the idea of a curse was the death of Howard Carter's canary, swallowed by a king cobra that came out of nowhere a few days before the archaeologists entered the tomb. As it happens, the cobra is one of the main symbols of pharaonic power and appears on Tutankhamun's famous mask. According to legend, Uraeus, the female cobra, has always protected the pharaoh from his enemies and from impious men who would dare disturb his eternal rest. According to the Times journalist who had exclusive coverage of the tomb opening, the curse was carved into the front of the entrance. It read, "I am he who drives back the thieves from the tomb with the flames of the desert. I am the protector of Tutankhamun's tomb." He also wrote that a terracotta tablet found in the sarcophagus chamber was inscribed with the words, "Death shall come on swift wings to him that toucheth the tomb of the Pharaoh."
Howard Carter himself will be quick to dispute the notion of a curse. But that doesn't stop the press. Who could resist the tale of an exotic, forgotten pharaoh's tomb, filled with riches guarded by a curse? In March 1939, Howard Carter, the main hero of this adventure, dies of lymphoma at the age of 64. In all, the newspapers reported up to 27 deaths over 5 decades. Each subsequent death is attributed to the curse of Tutankhamun, a story that still manages to intrigue us. People that are skeptical of the curse have proposed alternate theories to explain the premature deaths.
Some hypothesize that the sweet almond oil used to embalm the mummy was transformed into cyanide. Others speculate that the torches in Tutankhamun's tomb might have been laced with arsenic. We're even treated to some very far-fetched arguments, such as it could be the work of the priests who performed the funerary rites over 3,000 years ago, who placed an unknown, undetectable poison in the tomb to kill anyone who went inside. But this colorful theory fails to explain the deaths of those who never even entered the tomb.
Others will try to find a legitimate scientific and rational explanation for so many deaths associated with the tomb in order to diffuse the myth of the curse, while persisting in making a link between all these disappearances.
The most likely scientific explanation suggests that toxic pathogens may have been inhaled by people in contact with the tomb. Underground, with less oxygen, potentially toxic gases may circulate more easily. Still others claim that the archaeologists succumbed to asphyxiating pneumonia caused by a virus 3,000 years old.
And let's not forget about toxic molds. The theory is that they developed when fruit and vegetables placed in Tutankhamun's tomb putrefied. The tomb's humidity made them worse. Howard Carter himself mentioned respiratory discomfort in his notes. But specialists insist that no germ or fungus can survive such a long time in an enclosed space.
But if we look at both the actual circumstances and timing of each death, we arrive at a more mundane explanation.
It turns out that some of the deaths were actually suicides. Some were the result of crimes of passion. There was even one person who had never been to Egypt, but whose death was associated with a curse.
If the myth of Tutankhamun's curse collapses under scrutiny, perhaps it's because there was no curse in the first place. The ominous legend of Tutankhamun was manufactured by Arthur Merton, the Times journalist who had exclusive access to the expedition and wrote the article that broke the news of the discovery to the world.
He reported seeing the inscribed curse, but in reality, no trace of it has ever been found. What is true, however, is the well-preserved mural on the north wall of Tutankhamun's tomb. The late pharaoh is depicted with the image of a cobra in attack posture on his forehead, the traditional uraeus. It's a sign that could indeed be interpreted as a sort of warning.
But while reporting on the expedition, he will also add some fictional elements in the process.
But in reality, these symbols are simply associated with the ancient Egyptian cult of death, seen as a journey to the afterlife, with eternity more important than life on Earth.
In the end, perhaps the only man to suffer the curse of Tutankhamun was Howard Carter. Though he achieved his life dreams and lived to a respectable age, he'd seen his fortunes soar as a heroic explorer, only to crash under the weight of being called a glorified grave robber.
Howard Carter made Tutankhamun the world's most famous Egyptian. But even though many consider him the father of modern archaeology, his reputation has been tarnished by some of his actions. For example, he was accused of recovering objects from the tomb without Egyptian authorization. For a man born in the 19th century with a strong colonial mentality, this wasn't theft. He had a sense of entitlement, that the tomb belonged to him because he had discovered it. Eventually, as proof of his good faith, he donated most of the objects and did not enrich himself, living modestly for the rest of his life.
Even today, just over a century after the discovery of his tomb, Tutankhamun continues to fascinate both young and old. For more than 50 years, in cities around the world, each new exhibition devoted to the young pharaoh has been a guaranteed success, attracting millions of curious visitors, proving that the boy king still reigns in our collective imagination.